Dr. Hardy, thank you so much for joining us on my Flex for Life podcast. This title is The Silent Killer High Blood Pressure. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your background, what inspired you to become a doctor?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for having me today. Yes, my name is Dr. Lee Anthony Hardy. I am a board certified internist in Atlanta, Georgia. And I just have to tell you, I'm so excited to be here. To be here with a legend, to be here with the rest of you gentlemen, it's a pleasure. So, my entire life, I've been told I look exactly like my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. When I was a little boy, you look just like Arthur Lee Hardy. Arthur Lee Hardy was my father's father. They had 13 children, he and my grandmother. And again, as I said, I was always told that I look exactly like him. Long story short, is he was such a hardworking guy, had two or three jobs, and took care of his family. He farmed, and one of his jobs was a school bus driver. One day, while driving a busload of kids to school, he had a massive heart attack
Mm.
and he died. And that was during the time when men and schools were of 12th grade through kindergarten. One of the older kids was able to get the bus and keep further tragedy from happening. But my entire life, the rest of my life, I always, as a young boy, always said that I don't want young boys to never meet their grandfathers because of heart conditions, heart attacks, hypertension. And so my entire life, that was my guiding light, my star. So studied hard in school and was able to matriculate at the Medical College of Georgia, did my training at Atlanta Medical Center, and then did my what's called a rural medicine scholarship in North Georgia. After that, I became an internal medicine physician in a small town. And then I moved back to the Atlanta area when my father got sick and became a hospitalist. And now I am a geriatrician and a post-acute long-term care specialist in the Atlanta area.
Wow, that's a mouthful, and yeah, very inspiring. Sorry to hear about your grandfather, and I know when tragedy happens like that to kids at a young age, it has a long-term effect. A lot of times, unfortunately, in a negative way. Thank God it was in a positive way with you. But let's start with the scope of the problem. How prevalent is high blood pressure amongst Blacks, Hispanics, and Asian men
Yeah,
compared to other demographics?
extremely prevalent. So approximately 6 out of 10 Black men will have hypertension. And in the other communities that you mentioned, it's probably somewhere between 45 and 50%. But it's an extremely prevalent chronic disease. And unfortunately, in these communities, it doesn't get the attention that it probably deserves. A lot of reasons, cultural, a lot of reasons are economic, and also educational reasons, but extremely prevalent in these populations.
Wow.
Okay, getting more specifically into, so we understand it's prevalent. What are the issues that high blood pressure slash hypertension, whatever you want to call it, what makes it particularly dangerous in these communities?
Yeah. So hypertension in any community is dangerous. Let's just start there. And it's called the silent killer for a reason. So over the long term, so I like to make things very simple. By nature, I'm a country doc. So I like to make things very simple. So you think of the circulatory system. The heart is a big pump, and then the rest of the vessels are the sort of pipe plumbing that provides the circulation around the body. So if the pump, you want the system to be efficient. And so when the pump has to push against high pressures, and there are different reasons the pressure can be high. You can have too much fluid, water, blood in the system. The actual pipes can contract too much. They don't dilate enough or vasodilate enough. There are a lot of reasons that you can have inefficiencies in the system. When that happens, too much pressure in the system can cause damage to all the end organs. So damage to the eyes, damage to the kidneys, strokes, damage to the heart itself. The muscle can get hypertrophied and then it becomes dilated and you get congestive heart failure. So there's so many in organ damages from high blood pressure. So high blood pressure is dangerous, even though we don't have any symptoms often until it's too late.
Got it. Now, kind of putting Flex's question together with mine, are there any genetic factors that come into play for certain cohorts, or is it, is it nature, nurture? What are the causes typically?
Yeah, great question. There are a combination of things. There's a whole concept in medicine called epigenetics, where you have genetics being your hardwiring, and then actually your environment being sort of the software. So the hardware and the software, and the combination of both. So maybe you have maybe the genetic predisposition, in particular Black men. There's increased salt sensitivity, increased vasal tone, so to speak. And so you may have a genetic predisposition, but if your environment, meaning your nutrition, your lifestyle, your stress level, if those things if they coalesce in the same or in a harmful manner, the disease will be manifested more so in certain people than others. And so with, social determinants of health, poverty, poor education, poor access, the epigenetic factors lean more toward the environmental factors for these diseases being expressed.
Wow. So, question: how does high blood pressure diagnostics affect men, psychologically in the communities?
That's a very great question. A lot of answers to that question. One, like I said earlier, it's a silent killer. So people don't know if they don't get measured or get treated. If they don't go to the doctor, you don't know it. So you're kind of walking along and you just don't know you have that disease. That's why it's important to get a checkup. Most men and even some women take better care of their cars or their purses than they do their own bodies, right? And so you got to go and get a checkup and go to the doctor and see someone or see a clinician just to get the numbers. Vital signs are vital for a reason. Without a vital sign, you're not living, right? You don't have vital signs. You don't have a pulse. You don't have a heart rate. You don't have blood pressure. So you need to get those things checked. And so a lot of times people don't even know they have these diseases. And so the psychological effect is that I'm fine. And so by the time they have end organ damage, they go, what in the hell happened to me? Why me? And they didn't know all this time, all these sort of processes were going on in their body, leading them down this road.
I had an uncle that passed away at 42. And the thing with me is that a lot of this is totally preventable. Not all, not all, but he wouldn't take his medication. So can we kind of talk about the different levels of medication and its impact? Because for him, he didn't live the best lifestyle. He worked in the sun, he drank, he ate whatever, and he didn't make those changes that the doctor suggested. And then he got the medication got stronger and stronger to a part to where it began to create impotence. And once that started to happen, he chose not to take the medication. And long story short, within a year, he was gone. So can we talk about maybe some of the common medications and the effect? There are different levels of the medication that causes, male, dysfunction.
Yeah. So, let me go back to my first example. And I talked about the circulatory system with the heart being the pump, the center, all the vasculature coming from the heart being sort of the plumbing, sort of the pipes that allow the system to be efficient to bring circulation from the tip of our heads to the bottom of our feet. So what happens is certain medications work at different levels. Some medications work at taking too much fluid out of the body. They call them water pills or diuretics. Other medications work at increasing the diameter of the vessels. Others work at the level of the kidneys to decrease the hormones that have actions on the vessels and so on and so forth. So there are a myriad of different type of medications. Some of the side effects, especially the older medications, cause erectile dysfunction. But guess what? Science has figured out ways to help with those problems if you have those. There are also different types of medications that you can give that work at different levels that don't have those side effects. The thing is that people really need to understand that, this is a silent killer. not just a silent disease process. It kills, it maims, it causes end-stage renal diseases, strokes, heart attacks. And so we just have to be real and be honest and have a real open and honest conversation with our men, especially Black men. You know, your children need you, your wives need you. You know, that job doesn't need you as much as your family does. So these things are important factors that we, in conversations, crucial conversations we need to have as communities, especially in the African-American community, African-American men. We need to have these conversations so that people really understand what's at stake when they don't take care of themselves.
Flex, if you talk about your situation, you had a similar situation where it was silent in your life, but you had a hypertensive situation.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because, you know, I think obviously, you know, when I first even heard that I had any type of hypertension, it was when I was a kid. I used to get these nosebleeds all the time, and my mother finally took me to the doctor, and the doctor just explained, hey, he has hypertension, you know, that's the reason why his nosebleeds is relieving, you know, blood pressure. And then, you know, as I got older, it was in the early 90s when I was competing. I was supposed to have this type of surgery to open up my nasal because I snort a lot. And they prepped me for surgery and everything. And they came in and ran my blood pressure. And, you know, they kind of stared at me, walked out of the room. And, you know, some more doctors came in, ran my blood pressure again, and kind of stared at me, walked out of the room. And more doctors walked in and just asked me, like, how do you feel? I'm like, you know, I got a headache, you know, but I always have a headache. And they told me at that time, like, listen, we can't do the surgery on you. We can't cut you open. It's a chance you might bleed out. You know, we need to take you over to the emergency room. And, you know, that's the first time I've heard of blood pressure or anything like that. But obviously, you know, later on in life, it's still not known, you know, but and obviously I've had hundreds of surgeries. I've had, you know, many blood transfusions, you know, back in the early 90s where technology wasn't that great screening blood. Now I have this blood clotting disease that nobody else in my family tree has ever had, which caused me to have my right leg amputated because of a blood clot. So it's interesting. You have to really, what I found is you really have to ask doctors questions. You know, back when I was a kid, you just listened to what the doctor said and that was it. And now I find myself, you have to almost be your own advocate. And, you know, you also have to be aware of what doctor you're seeing, because it doesn't mean that they're that great of a doctor. Just like a trainer says they're a professional trainer, doesn't mean that they're a good trainer or the trainer for you. So it's really interesting to hear your perception on this. And then also just obviously education has gotten so broad since those times that I began to have those problems.
How old did you say you were when you first started having those issues?
Man, I can remember the house I lived in the area, so couldn't have been no more than like 8, 9 years old. Yeah.
Oh.
Usually in children, and I don't treat children, and but usually in children with high blood pressure, you're usually looking at a secondary cause for hypertension, what we call secondary hypertension, meaning you're looking for some type of excuse me. It is a tumor that's in the adrenal glands, or some type of, you know, brain tumor, or some type of tumor that's secreting some type of hormone that's causing sort of a cortisol or increased hormonal reaction. Or you're dealing with, you mentioned something very interesting, that you had to have nasal surgery that could have been due to your blood pressure could have been elevated due to having obstructive sleep apnea, which sometimes untreated, especially in Black men. I know for a fact that was part of why my father passed away. He had untreated obstructive sleep apnea that will cause untreated blood pressure or uncontrolled blood pressure, even with treatment. A lot of men, if you got resistant hypertension, you're on 3 or 4 medications. You know, question like, okay, what's going on? Like, do they have a feel? Do they have obstructive sleep apnea? Like, you really need to be asking questions. If someone is on 3 or more medications for blood pressure and you're not getting anywhere, there may be a secondary cause. Is there a tumor in the brain, or a tumor on the adrenal glands, or the kidney? Does he have polycystic kidney disease? I mean, there's something else. So you just can't, like you said, you do have to ask questions. You do have to be your own advocate. And it's very important that, you measure your blood pressure yourself. Sometimes people have, white coat hypertension, they say, where in the physician's office or in the doctor's office, your blood pressure automatically is going to be a little bit higher because what you're stressed, you don't know what's going on. So you need to, be an active participant in your own care. So check your blood pressure, go to the fire station, or, get you a monitor at home. But, it's something that needs to be, it's a dynamic situation. It can change second to second, minute to minute. So there are times when you may want to make sure you're repeating your blood pressure daily or several times a day, or taking it at different times a day. I've had patients that blood pressures are fine every morning, but when they check it at night, it's extremely high. They've had a long day and stressful day or whatever. So there are so many different variables that you need to be aware of and, considering when you're trying to treat these disease processes. But it's not hopeless. You just got to stay on top of things and find a doctor that you can trust and talk to, he or she, or a nurse practitioner or PA, and stay involved and keep asking questions. If you don't feel right about something, something isn't right. Ask questions.
Yeah, you mentioned something. You mentioned stress. That was going to be my next question. What role does stress play, and the consequences of having hypertension?
Oh, it's a huge role. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Cortisol raises your other stress hormones, other mineralocorticoids and other hormones that cause increased salt retention, increased volume retention. It increases blood pressure automatically. Also, sleep. People don't realize how sleep deprivation increases blood pressure. Sleep is vitally important. So stress, you want to practice some type of relaxation, whatever hobbies you have. You want to practice either meditation, prayer, mindfulness, things that you can just sort of forget everything and just relax and, bring it down, bring down the temperature a little bit. That will go a long way. Exercise, of course, exercise as well. So when a lot of times as physicians, we talk about lifestyle modifications. These are all under that umbrella. Lifestyle modifications. I think we don't do a good enough job at prescribing, lifestyle modification. Everybody wants a pill, and sometimes pills are extremely necessary and very important. Don't get me wrong, but part of that, and I'll go back to what I said earlier about the epigenetics. Your genetics are your hardware, your predisposition, but your environment, your lifestyle, the lifestyle modifications, the stress, those things, your diet, those things are extremely important as well. We need to prescribe more of that, and we need to put more resources into those treatments as well.
So I didn't know what cortisol was or is. It says it's a steroid hormone, primarily known as the body's main stress hormone. It produces by the adrenal gland and plays a crucial role in regulating various body functions, including metabolism, blood pressure, and the sleep-wake cycle. Is that like being in the days? What is sleep-wake cycle? Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in caveman days, before we had all these artificial light, right? Before maybe 100, 200 years ago, or even longer, we didn't have all this artificial light. So we had a normal circadian cycle, right? And so what happens is when the light hits your eye, your body starts to release cortisol, wakes, telling you to wake up. And cortisol is part of that fight or flight system, that sympathetic nervous system. Cortisol is one of the main hormones that get things going. So back in the day, before we had this artificial light, our sleep-wake cycle was sort of regulated. When the sun came up, we started to wake up. When it went down, right before the sun started to go down, we had a surge of melatonin, and the melatonin started the cycle, and so on and so forth. You get sleepy, get sleep pressure, where ADP builds up, you go to sleep. Same thing happens again, you wake up. That's the sleep-wake cycle. Modern life is different. We got lights everywhere. We got our cell phones in our face. Every time that cell phones hit your face in the middle of the night, you're telling your prehistoric brain it's time to wake up. And so you sort of disturbing the sleep-wake cycle. Increased stress does the same thing. So chronic stress, increase cortisol, disrupt the sleep-wake cycle, disrupt blood pressure regulation, disrupts blood sugar regulation. So that's why stress is a very important part of your health. I mean, regulating stress is a very important part of good health and getting good sleep as well.
Can you jump on that a little bit more? Take someone who has hypertensive situation, maybe even secondary wise, and then you add emotional stress and then exercise stress or anything else, you get that autonomic response of the cortisol release and the parasympathetic response. Can you go over how that could exacerbate things even more?
Oh yeah, you got a constant cycle of just feedback mechanism, stress, cortisol, increased cortisol, and then your body even starts to be numb and you don't get the normal response that you should be able to have a normal sympathetic response to stress. I mean, stress is part of our life. Stress is part of our get up and go and take care of, running from that saber-toothed tiger or whatever it is. But when you have constant elevation of stress, you sort of reduce the amount of you're always fatigued, you're always tired, you get a burnout kind of a situation or scenario. So it actually just speeds up and people who are chronically stressed, they look older than they are, they feel less, they're always chronically fatigued. So it's a very important part. You really need to sort of break that cycle with things like exercise or meditation, prayer, just doing things that you enjoyed, something that a hobby or something that you can just take a step back and sort of take a deep breath. Breathing is actually one of the very most important and very important. Breathing exercises can just instantly change your physiology. A lot of people don't believe that. Taking a deep breath, just letting it go, instantly slows down your heart rate. Instantly. You can't help it. What happens is it sends a parasympathetic vagus nerve surge, slows things down. And just a simple, quick way of doing that when you're sort of, in that stress cycle.
Yeah, I learned that in martial arts. Like after I would finish fighting, I would just be extremely fatigued. And my instructor at the time, Ty McGuire, he would just sit there in front of me and just force me to breathe slowly. And he'd also pinch on these pressure points, like in between my thumb and my finger, and just have me breathe. And immediately that would happen. Even sometimes when I go in to have my blood pressure checked and I knew it was going to be high, I would sit there moments before. I'm like this, and they're talking to me, and I'm just blanking them out, and I'm just like breathing, as normal as possible and slow as possible. But you can actually hear and feel your heart rate slow down if you hold your breath long enough and exhale.
That's like taking cheat notes into a test, Flex.
Huh?
That's like taking cheat notes into a test.
Yeah.
But it's helpful. It's helpful. Imagine doing that repeatedly. Or taking intervals during the day where you actually work that into your day. That's part of your routine. That's part of your lifestyle modification. Simple intervention, doesn't cost any money, doesn't have any side effects, but that's something that we can all do. And so the education part that we talked about earlier is something that people, it sounds soft, it isn't scientific, but it works. And it worked for millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years that, some of the yogic cultures, Eastern cultures, that's part of what they do. They don't have the same philosophy of how to treat certain diseases that we do. And I'm by no means an Eastern medicine man of sort, but I do understand that there are physiological things that we can do to sort of relax and reduce our stress.
Do you remember telling me, I don't know if you remember, you told me once that the 5 best medicine were sleep, exercise, food, sun, and wind. Is that correct? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was attributed to I think Charlie Chapman, but yeah, you're somewhere in there, and I always have to go back and look it up as well. But I think the best medicines are sun, like you said, sun, food, love. I think friends or something like that was one of them as well. So I mean, basically, it's things that God gave us
Mhm.
that, you know, that are free and that we sometimes take for granted. We get so busy in modern life, and we get so busy with, you know, other things, that we forget that these things are part of what can really help our overall health. You know, I mean, great friends, great relationships, drinking plenty of water, eating nutritious food, you know, staying away from processed food. All these things that we talk about actually are really just kind of going back to the future.
I looked it up online. It was saying like some of the better foods you can eat. It even says potassium, omega-3 fatty acids, but the one that really stands out to me is the fish oil, the garlic, the cinnamon, but the beetroot. Have you heard anything about that? The beetroot in terms of because I've heard it a lot more than any rest of them. The beet being a good source.
So I'm not a nutritionist, but I will tell you this. This is what I try to tell my patients, and what I try to live by myself. If your plate is everything is the same color,
Mm.
you're not eating healthy,
Mm.
right? I know. Now, granted, if you're green, everything's green, you may be okay. But everything looks yellow, like potatoes, and brown, like meat, you know, beef. There's no, you know, you're not getting all the nutrients, the antioxidants, and all the other things that you need. You're not getting those vital, nutritious foods. Then you're not eating healthy, and you're increasing your risk that those diseases that you may be genetically inclined to get, that you will manifest those diseases. They will be part of your pathology if you don't. That's part of that epigenetic. I talked about the sort of environmental part. If you don't try to keep that plate sort of rainbow colorish with different antioxidant and any different foods that will help nourish your body, you're going to be in bad shape.
So do you think that I would think so that high blood pressure has a direct or indirect impact on testosterone levels?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah.
Go deep on this one. This crowd will love this one.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I'm by no means an endocrinologist or urologist, but I mean, stress, a lot of those hormones come from the same sort of factory in the body, out of the adrenal and out of the testicular glands in men. And so, I mean, it's only so much that if you're producing all the cortisol, there's going to be less of the sort of precursors for the testosterone, right? You're going to suppress the feedback loop. They're all kind of feedback loops in the body, from the brain, from the brain, the hypothalamus, where a lot of the sort of precursors for the releasing hormones, they go to the pituitary gland. Those hormones go to the actual in organ glands, the adrenals and other. If you're constantly on one pathway, there's not enough energy and precursors for the other pathways. And so I can just remember during a period of my life when I was extremely stressed, extremely fatigued, working so many hours, on call, working 2 night jobs, 12-hour night jobs, 14 days in a row, 1 day off.
Yeah, he was crazy. He was on some stuff.
And I mean, my doctor did he was all over me, my thyroid. He did all kind of tests, and my testosterone was on the floor. Mm-hmm. And he was going to put me on the kind of the topical cream and everything. And I did it for a while, but once I realized, I think LaQuentin might be knocked me over the head a few times, and some other people started talking some sense into me, I started feeling better. My numbers start going up. I started exercising. So you get that shift in the substrate instead of everything going toward the cortisol. And once I started, changing my lifestyle, again, that epigenetics, that environmental part, that lifestyle part, I was able to maintain a healthy level. Now, there's nothing wrong if you need, sometimes if you have, testosterone deficiencies or inefficiencies, supplements can be helpful, and some people need them. So that is something that you and your particular physician, can talk about. I would advise.
So are you saying on these pathways, those that relates to testosterone is kind of down the list, that a lot of other things have to happen before whatever the body
Well, as you know, with age, men, as we all age, sort of, we're going to have a
Flex
decrease.
doesn't age.
Right, flex does age, but we're all going to have some decrease in certain hormones. I mean, that's just that's mother nature. That's just nature. However, now we have safe medications. We have supplements. There are some natural supplements. There are other. Again, I'm not an endocrinologist nor a male, specialist in those terms. But you may need supplementation. I would never tell someone not to get supplementation if you need supplementation, and I wouldn't tell someone to get supplementation when they don't need supplementation. That's a personal and private conversation. But we will have, over time, as we age, a decrease in those hormone levels.
Do you see a difference in how like men in different culture backgrounds process and cope with the being diagnosed with high blood pressure?
I do. I see it more so with class, though. I see it more so with class, I would say, but I do see a difference. I see a difference in the way people respond. I see a difference in their support. I see a difference with some people who are not necessarily engaged with the healthcare delivery system in this country in the way they should. They're automatically suspicious. They automatically, start talking about the side effects and other things where there's such a small percentage that they're probably likely not going to have that side effect. So, but they already have this ingrained suspicion of the system. And so anything related to the system, the diagnosis, the medication, the whatever, they're not inclined to follow the advice. And what ends up happening is you have that 10% difference that we mentioned earlier. That's millions of people in this country alone. 10%, 6 out of 10 Black men will have hypertension, and most of them will not be engaged in the system and will not be following with a primary care doctor or not taking medications. Therefore, you see all the organ damages, the strokes, the heart attacks. Right now, I'm in post-acute long-term care, and that is people. Most of those people in the long-term care side are people who've had massive strokes or other, amputations, complications from chronic diseases that they didn't get treatment early enough, or they didn't get involved with someone in the system often enough to prevent, what had happened to them.
What I find really interesting, like in my personal experience, it's like that saying, if you put a frog in cold water and turn the water up, it'll sit there and boil. But if you drop it in a hot boiling water, it'll jump out. I've dealt with high blood pressure all my life. And there was a episode where I had to get rushed to the hospital just due to sheer pain. And if I remember correctly, my blood pressure was something like 210 over 205 or something like that. And repetitively, doctors would walk in, check my blood pressure, walk out. 2 more doctors would walk in, to the point it was like 8 doctors, and they just stared at me. They're like, "How do you feel?" I'm like, I'm in pain. But, so what I find a lot of times is like high output athletes, we deal with trauma all the time. We're training hard. So of course we're going to be tired. We're going to have pains. We're going to have headaches from stressful workouts and stuff like that. But what we're not realizing is there could be some underlying, damage that's been going on. So for myself, it's just, I just got used to headaches, so that it was just a part of my life. And, it didn't really register anymore, where a normal person probably would be going through those things for the first time, would be alarmed and run to the emergency room. Do you find that a lot in your cases?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, some people, tolerance for pain or tolerance for conditions are much higher. And unfortunately, those people don't get involved or get the type of care that they actually need in a timely manner. Again, I think that's another thing where the system has to be more accommodating more culturally appropriate, more sensitive to maybe athletes or other segments of the population. One thing I've learned in my 25 years of being a physician is this, and it's probably one of the most important things I learned from the country docs that kind of trained me. You have to listen. You have to listen and you have to observe. Most doctors stop listening, and I'm not talking bad about any of my colleagues, but studies have shown after 10, 15 seconds, they're done listening. They're working strictly on their differential and what they're going to tell you to do and what you should do. I've trained myself to try to listen for at least 1 minute uninterrupted to my patients. And what has happened is that a lot of times the patients, when I do that, even though the whole duration of the visit may only be another 5 minutes or 10 minutes, they feel as if I've talked to them for an hour because I sat there and I tuned out everything else but what was going on with them. I listened and then I repeated back the most important parts of what they said to me. So if I'm hoping that if I had taken care of you, I would have kind of tried to dig deeper. Like, it's unusual for a professional athlete to have this high of a blood pressure at all at any time, and you're accustomed to this. In other words, most people will be having stroke symptoms with that level of blood pressure that you told me, unless their body has acclimated to that high of pressure. I would be asking myself, how is he still like just fine? Maybe a little small head. Is this something that's chronic? Why is it chronic? He's a healthy, I need to be looking deeper. And so unfortunately, sometimes culturally, Black men in particular, aren't as receptive to that. And on the other side of the relationship, doctors aren't that engaging in certain populations, is what I found.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's so many times where a doctor would walk in, like I'm in a hospital, and a doctor would walk in, and as soon as they walk in, like within 10 seconds, they're looking at their clock, and I can tell they're already thinking about leaving and walking out. And a lot of times it would be the nurse, because the nurse would spend so much time with me. They would be my advocate. And there was one time where I was trying to explain something to a doctor, and a nurse interrupted, and she started explaining it better. And the doctor turned around and looked at her and said, "If I want your information, I'll ask you for it. Now leave." And that was a time where I was a little bit more, aggressive and kind of aware of my powers. And I looked at the doctor and I said, "Hey, listen, don't ever talk to her like that again. You're fired. Leave my room now," and have someone else come back in. But, I get it. I get it. There's, on the doctor side, there's limited amount of time, like you said, how much you used to work before and all that. And then also I'm aware that the longer we're in the hospital, the less that doctor's being paid. So possibly the less they're going to be interacted with you. Do you run into any cases like that? Have you had any situations like that?
You mean in terms of the financial
Just witnessing,
pressure,
not
pressures?
yourself, but witnessing your colleagues really being tuned out like that?
Yeah. Fortunately, I would say things are changing. There are different press. There are different sort of constructs and demands on doctors. Sort of fortunately, the fact we're moving away from this kind of fee for service where you got to see a lot of people to make, whereas the quality part of medicine is starting to shine through. In other words, a lot of doctors, we're being measured based on how well our diabetic patients are doing. So some of the metrics that when the insurers are looking at us and they're ranking us and they're ranking our practices and they're ranking hospital plans and hospitals, they're saying, all right, how do these providers do when you look at all the pneumonia patients they've taken care of? Do they do these certain things? What are their core measures? So medicine is heading toward the right direction, in my opinion. Whereas, you're seeing so many people, obviously the era of the way I train as a doctor has changed a lot to the way that they're being trained now. It's more, they don't have to be on. I can remember being on call for, 48 hours in a row, not going home to the next evening. Now they cap how many patients they can train and have doing training. They have to be at home by a certain time. And I think those are all good things. Because again, as physicians, and as any provider, your health is impacted as well if you're not at your best. You want to be at your best for the people that you're taking care of. So I have seen that, and maybe it was sort of an older construct, but it's getting better. It's getting better. It's sort of shifting toward quality as opposed to quantity.
Mm.
And it's also getting more where people are understanding that they have the right to do what you said you did. I can ask someone else to take care of me. I have rights as a patient. I have a right as a human being to be treated, with respect. And I think our profession is, to me, it's the most wonderful profession in the world. We get to try to extend and improve the quality of life for people, some that we don't even know. But for me, it's the most rewarding thing that I think I could be doing with my gifts and my talent and my intellect. I don't think I can see myself doing anything else. And so I think that we're attracting the right type of people. I think that we're shifting toward the right type of attitudes and performances and metrics that's going to improve the quality of healthcare. I think it's just certain segments that are always kind of left behind, where those of us like LaQuinton, who are out here as health advocates and insurance advocates, are in doing things like you were doing, Flex. You guys are doing, bringing, content and education and resources to people, is sort of nudging the whole system in the right direction.
To
So guys,
piggyback up on that one a little bit, sorry, quit you, but seeing as the majority of the people watching us will probably be in the United States, with the passage of a certain bill that I won't label as beautiful or anything else, what are the financial consequences of individuals that have been diagnosed with high blood pressure that they and their families will probably see moving forward?
That's a great question. Unfortunately or fortunately, I just don't get that involved in those type of questions, politics, because what I found is that when I do that, you sort of tend to forget to keep the main thing, and that for me is taking care of patients regardless. And so what I do feel and what I do understand is that there are going to be people hurting if the safety nets are removed. There's so many people who were helped with, the last time we had a big shift in the way healthcare is delivered, with the Obamacare passage. So many people got into the system and were pulled into the system. And we kind of talked about that, those 10% or those huge percentage of people who've been left behind because they had no access, they had no trust, they didn't have advocates out there. They began to have a way to engage in the system without worrying about losing their entire saving. They had an affordable plan. I haven't looked at the big, beautiful bill enough to really know sort of what that will do. But I know if it's cutting back on prevention, if it's cutting back on education, if it's cutting back on access to care, if it's cutting back on insurance, it's just not going to be a good thing. If you're taking people off Medicaid, if you're not expanding Medicaid the way that it was intended to, if you were involved and I'm in a state that didn't do it, and I saw, tons of rural hospitals close. The rural hospital that I used to work at, where I first trained, is gone. So in Georgia, we did not take the Medicaid expansion, and we paid the price for it. I believe, in my opinion. But if that's what's going to happen from this big, beautiful bill, I haven't really looked at it. But if that's what's going to happen, then we're going to be seeing a lot of people who were plugged into primary care, plugged into prevention, plugged into programs to help teach them about, their diseases. Those things, you're going to see a downstream effect When you don't handle things upstream, you're going to see a big downstream effect. And I think Obamacare, with all of its, things that weren't right with it, did a lot of good for bringing people into the system that were left out. And a lot of times those people had these chronic diseases that were clogging up our ERs, clogging up, thousands.
So it would happen again.
They didn't have access. You were catching them before they got to that point.
So think this out. I won't go on my tangent, but I see the real numbers. I see the real costs associated with it. So one of the things that the current president did, he passed this legislation so that your medical bills can no longer hinder or be reported on it. They can report them, but you can get them removed when it comes to medical bills. So the way they look at your treatment for having medical bills reported on your credit report and being wiped out.
You're talking about price transparency, or you're talking about something else?
Nah, I'll make sure I get it posted in the link below, guys, within the week. There's one of the things Trump did is he set it up so when you're looking at your credit, that they can't count your medical bills against you. You literally can write in and get them removed. I forget what the actual legislation was. I'll make sure I get it put in this thing down here. But if they put that on your credit report, you can have it removed. Now, one of the things that I did a study, several years ago as to why people go to the emergency room. So what you're going to start to happen now is that you're going to have an influx in people going to the emergency room. So now the average people you see in the emergency room now, there is going to most likely go up. And then that's going to create a bottleneck. So it's going to impact the people who are more severely injured and being processed through, because now, it's being used for all kind of things. One of the things they said, people used to go to the emergency room because their doctor wouldn't see them. They didn't have enough, the appointment was too far out for them to see their doctor. People addicted to certain types of pain medication would go. And I learned a while back, yes, if you go into an emergency room, or you go to the hospital, they have to stabilize you. So Dr. Hardy, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a big difference between stabilization and treatment. And have you known situations where in hospital systems that if an individual does not have insurance, they stabilize and transfer to the county? Is that a I'm gonna put you on the spot. You just, if you don't want to answer, you're fine.
Yeah. So no, I'll answer the question. So basically, here's what's happening in the ER. So the ER has become, and there's several reasons for this, but the main reason the ERs are so crowded and overcrowded is because there's a huge shortage of primary care providers in the country. And so what happens is either there's a shortage of primary care, and then there are people who don't have insurance. So if you add those two factors, people without insurance and the shortage of primary care providers, so you have people who have nowhere else to go. They use the ER as their primary care. And then you have people who have places to go, or they may have insurance, but you can't get a visit for with your primary care doctor because there's a huge shortage in primary care. This is one of the reasons for the explosion in what we call mid-levels or advanced practice practitioners, MPs and PAs. The reason that they've exploded is because of the demand that's needed for primary care. So there are not that many people. So for example, myself, I'm a primary care provider. I'm an internal medicine physician. There's not that many people that finish residency and want to go into primary care. They want to go into the more super subspecialist fields where they either make more money, have more interest, but I will say that's the fact of what's going on. Whatever their motivation is, they are going into these specialties or super subspecialties, and therefore there's a lack of primary care. And there's several reasons for that. Tons of different reasons, some economic, some interest, whatnot, some, whatever it is, the fact remains that when you have something that you're not sure what's going on and you don't have a doctor that you can call and go to, where are you going to go? You're not going to really go to urgent care if you don't have that $75 or $100. You go to the ER, and the ER, they have to see you by law. So they have to see you. So now you got people who probably could have going to see that doctor and got a breathing treatment and a steroid and an antibiotic and go home, but they don't have any place to go. So that's where you're getting a bottleneck because of the lack of primary care, or if you don't have insurance, you're all converging on the ER because they can't tell you no.
So what do you think about the cash pay model? Do you anticipate that that's going to be a much more prevalent cash pay type situations?
There's going to be a market for that, I'm sure, especially those people where I see it probably being more beneficial, or those people who may get kicked off of the sort of Obamacare because of whatever reason the state decides they're going to take over the exchanges and just change the dynamic of the exchanges, and then people are going to be forced. Because I can tell you, for a long time, I kept a W-2 job forever because I have chronic illness. I'm a diabetic and I have high blood pressure. And even though I could afford it at that time before the Affordable Care Act, I could not. I was considered uninsurable. I could not even buy a private individual plan because the insurance companies, they would not sell it to me. They said I was uninsurable because they didn't want a whole pool of people who had diseases and chronic illnesses, and they couldn't, it would not make actuarial sense for them to do that. It wasn't a good business. Pre-existing condition. Exactly. So I could not get it as a 1099. But when Obamacare came out, I got my plan, and I've been rolling ever since as I was doing an independent contractor, started my solo practice, and so on and so forth for many years. But I think what's going to happen is as they roll that back, or whatever they're going to do in this bill, I haven't looked at it enough to really, really tell you what I predict. But my hunch and my guess is that they're going to start rolling some of that back, and some of the people who have the resources to just get that, they may decide, well, I'll go back to maybe just getting a catastrophic plan, and then for my day-to-day chronic issues or urgent care issues, I can pay the cash. But again, that's going to be people that have those resources and able to do that. Unless there's some creative sort of pricing and models out there to kind of catch those working class and poor, you probably won't see them involved as much in the cash part of it, or direct primary care is what they call it in some cases. You won't see that as much, but it will be a market for that, I think, once people start getting kicked off of these plans that have been, pretty useful for those of us who are sort of entrepreneurial in spirit and kind of work as independent, businessmen, small businessmen and women.
So it cut part of it off. I looked it up. It says the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has finalized a rule that prohibits credit reporting agencies from including medical debt or credit reports, and also prohibit lenders from using medical debt information when making credit decisions. The rule, which amends Regulations 5 implementing the Fair Credit Reporting Act, LCCR, went into effect in March 2025. So that's a whole different thing right there, because now, people can say, I go to the doctor, bill me, they say to hell with it. They just don't pay the bill because it can't count against them credit wise. But I do.
Dr. Hardy, does a doctor get paid still when that happens?
Attention, maybe. No attention, actually. Paid.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I don't think so, because that's something that you'll probably have to write off or as bad debt, or fortunately for me, in my personal situation, is most of my patients and residents are, they're in long-term care, and they are. I don't have private pay patients in the hospital. That may happen in most private offices. They're not going to even see you if you don't come in with, you got to show your insurance card at the door.
Yeah.
So you're not getting past that door.
Yeah.
Most of the time in most of your offices, primary care specialists. So mostly the hospitals, but a lot of times, a lot of states, a lot of charitable organizations will come in and sort of pay for indigent or bad debt. to help families and patients out like that. I don't know. I see that as a double-edged sword or
Absolutely.
blessing, because there's some people who honestly a catastrophic event. I remember when I was in residency, I had a lawyer. She didn't get insurance. She was kind of freshly starting, and she had what I'm suspecting Flex may have had, some type of hypercoagulable disorder. She developed a clot, and she had a huge pulmonary embolism in her lung. She almost died. I mean, it was a massive PE, pulmonary embolism, and she was on a vent, and she was like, I mean, she was a great young lawyer, and she, stayed in the hospital maybe a month. And when she got out, she couldn't get insurance. She was uninsurable. She couldn't, but she continued to come to our clinic. She was my patient, come to my clinic as a resident. I was still in training. But the hospital wrote off or some. So, I mean, for someone like her with some catastrophic event like that, unintended, unexpected, I'm okay with them not putting that on her credit, right? I think it may not be that bad of a thing, but in some cases, people who are just taking advantage of a system that's built for someone who goes through something like she did, it's not such a good thing to do. And I think karma will sort that out anyway. But that's kind of where I think it's kind of a double-edged sword in that case.
I had a question. Do you think that married men have lower high blood pressure?
My wife is coming probably around the corner.
I was gonna say, man.
So I'm gonna answer this correctly. Of course, married men are healthier and married men live longer, but those are facts. Those are facts. Yes, absolutely.
I know.
I could agree.
This, I'm gonna share this. I was talking to Dr. Hardy a while back, and after this, I want to share something that's pretty amazing about some of the things that he does in the community. But he told me this was a while back. We was talking about different things when I was talking about looking at the TRT, and he was getting his opinion on it. And it actually said that the high blood that Cialis, that it was actually developed as a treatment for cardiovascular conditions such as angina, chest pains, and hypertension. So to all those that are, I think that's pretty, I thought it was pretty interesting that that some men have the opportunity to reduce their high blood pressure. But what happened? I want to ask the doctor, what happened that it was just focused more on the ED side than actually on this side for high blood pressure? I'm sure it has some positive effects. What happened with it? Do you know?
Yeah, so you'd be surprised. There's so many different things that had other indications and were developed for other intentions that ended up being used for something else. Not only Cialis, I think minoxidil was initially a blood pressure medicine, and then we use it to grow hair. I mean, there's so many things that when they're doing these studies, and that's why we do these studies, and that's why there is a whole system of there's a pipeline. There's the basic sciences, the universities, and then the NIH, and they're doing these studies, and that's why people do studies, so that you can see the effects, the side effects, and things that happen. And they developed it based on, like we talked about earlier, some of these medications work at certain levels to do certain things. Then they turn out not to be very good at that thing. But then you see it had effect of, it was a good vasodilator, but not good for lowering blood pressure. So that's why you have to do the studies. They developed it in the lab, started the basic sciences lab. They developed it. Hey, here's the formula. Here's the chemical compound. How does it work in vivo? How does it work in vitro? I mean, how does it work, in the lab? How does it versus how it works in actual humans? Now we have to get it approved, the FDA. We go through several trials. And then you have to actually do the numbers. How does it do with blood pressure? Some people are on the wrong blood pressure medicine because it's not right for them. So that what happened with Cialis is that when they did all the studies for blood pressure, it wasn't moving the needle on blood pressure. However, you got whatever you got with that, and so therefore, being a free market economy that we are, they say, you know what, we got another use for this, and it's safe. And we know it's safe because these people that were going to stage for blood pressure had no issues, except for this one, which was a good problem to have. So that has happened with so many different medications you wouldn't believe. There's even other things. I think, so many scientists and so many, Louis Pasteur, other people were doing other things, trying to find out certain things. And, that's just sort of karma. And when you're going into certain things, sometimes with the best of intentions, and you're taking a scientific approach and method, and you're really, really being honest with the results, and you're seeing what's going on, something good may come out of that particular intervention. And that's what happened with those.
I have another quick question. I have a question for Flex and a question for Greg. A lot of minorities, I know you've done some work on this. A lot of minorities refuse to participate in clinical trials. And we refuse to participate in clinical trials, but then we take the medication. Just think about that. We refuse to participate in the clinical trial. They always reference back to Tuskegee. But then we are some of the biggest consumers of medication. I don't understand that. So what have you seen as relates to minorities participating in clinical trials? And is it true that a lot of these medications are made without the consideration of the different genetics that's in the Japanese, the African American, Hispanic, the Asian? I saw a thing that once said that most of the clinical trials are conducted on white males and surprisingly Japanese males. Do you have any input on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's an ugly history. And when you are outside of the system and you don't feel like you're really being invited inside of the system, then folklore and untruths, half-truths, things like that predominate. Unfortunately, there's only about 6% of all physicians that are African American. And we know, like, the outcomes, when you look at all the outcome data in terms of, CHF or diabetes or whatever, death rates, African American probably lead every category, African American men in particular. And that's across all kind of economic strata. However, if you take those same segment of population and you say, all right, let's look at those African American that have these disease processes, and they have doctors that look like them, or Hispanic that look like them, or understand their culture, or understand certain things, the numbers improve drastically. And so what that tells me is this: there's a cultural, there's a systemic, I won't even call it racism. It's just a misunderstanding and a missing of cues. Like a lot of times, African American women, their level of pain gets sort of misdiagnosed, or at least not paid as much attention to as, let's say, their white counterpart female. And so they may go in and they like, well, she's tough, she can handle it, she's the backbone of the family. And even Black women themselves go in with that mindset. And then they end up having a massive heart attack, needing a bypass, or they don't make it because people are not really listening. They have a different expectation if they're not of the same culture, or if they haven't dealt with enough of those particular individuals or that population. And so with that only being 6% and probably only 2% of our doctors in this country are African-American men, you're going to see that mismatch in outcomes data when people they can't really identify. And so that's something I think that at one point, I know that's something that I try to address. I mentor several young people of all colors, because I think we just need good providers of all stripes. But I do pay special attention and give, as much time and information as I can to those that are interested in taking the path that I've taken.
This question is for Greg. When I look up kinesiology and what it means and what it represents, do you think that high blood pressure has an impact a significant impact on what you do as a living, even as it relates to your training and what you do. How does high blood pressure fall into that? And do you believe there are certain things that by working with a professional trainer or a trainer period would drastically improve their overall situation?
Well, first off, just to go back a little bit, calling Tuskegee medical trials like calling the Trail of Tears.
No, I didn't mean that. I was just saying.
So just saying those.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, I didn't mean that. I mean that's the reason. That's the reason many of us mistrust this season, and that's the reason many African Americans do not participate in medical trials.
Well-founded fear, or mistrust, I should say. But for us, we don't ever, or a well thoughtful trainer would never make guarantees about any kind of health biomarkers being something that we'll fix directly. But that's actually something we do look at during the initial assessment process as far as what's called a PAR-Q. So looking at health biomarkers, things that we might need to refer back to a physician for authorization. If it's something where they're 140 over 90, that's very, that's kind of at that one line where it's not so bad. Whereas if someone came in like Flex was 220 over 210 or whatever that was, I would literally call 911 most likely if that really came up once or twice. First time I think I really messed it up, but those are things that if you are, I look at those negative health biomarkers as a symptom of an overall problem of being unhealthy or having some kind of imbalance that's involved. So take into account getting the right kind of physical activity, taking into account of getting the right kind of lifestyle changes outside of the gym, like the doc talked about, sleep, stress reduction, the right type of food getting in, going out and not, putting the work outside, putting the workouts outside of thought, going and hanging out with your family on the beach and getting some sunlight. And what's the saying? All the kids are saying now, touch grass. Go get your feet in the grass. Get some nature out there and let things kind of, settle down a little bit. And I think, he and Flex both talked about the psychological direct effect on your actual physical being is there. There's a direct link. If you take things and you center yourself and you bring things down, a lot of other things will actually start to itself calm down. But at the same time, there could be a lot of other issues that are not directly affected by, what a personal trainer or nutritionist and a psychologist altogether could even do. So that's why we don't make those kinds of determinations or promises.
So this is to both you and Flex. Then I have another question for Flex. It's never happened with me. Do trainers typically ask a new client, do they have any critical or chronic conditions that they need to be aware of? Do you ask for blood pressure and those type of things so you know what you're working with?
I have a packet this thick that they fill out before I even talk to them.
Got it.
Yeah, I have a massive questionnaire that
It's massive.
Yeah, it's from all walks of life, but one of the things, depending on if it's just a regular person trying to get back in shape that hasn't been in shape, I won't go that far. But if it's an athlete or somebody who's looking to make some exponential gains, I'll immediately require blood work because I need to know what's going on. I mean, there can be a certain workout or food plans that I have them on, and they may be deficient or have these other problems that are going to be heightened. So it just depends on what level they're at that I'll go to what level I need to go to.
Just even jumping in there on our online application fitness program, coaching program, it has an extensive, you went through it, it has a fairly extensive questionnaire that you have to fill out before we take your money at all.
As a side note, if you have T Fitness for You, he says Mitsubishi has one of the largest pharmaceutical facilities in the world. Japanese pharmaceutical companies are very competitive in the world market when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So maybe that's the reason the Japanese are more, larger, participate in those trials more so than others.
Well, we discussed this before. I think just culturally, we're from a culture that it just authority and kind of an inclusiveness has just always been our thing. So we're very trusting of physicians, even to this day. Except my aunt, she's a physician. I don't like her, but
Tell us how you really feel.
but aside that fact, I mean, I think I have a different conceptual recognition of doctors than someone who came from a culture that they were literally experimented on in our country by our doctors, by our government. We didn't have that history, so we have a different outlook on the whole process.
Get it. So Flex, this weekend you have some things going on where, in my mind, it's I won't say it's a clinical trial, but it's something completely different I don't think you've ever done before. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about about what's going to take place for the next I think was it the next Sunday through next Wednesday? Do you mind talking about that, sharing some of the, because Flex has always been open to making sure he's in the best health possible. It was one of the reasons we so love the relationship, because his attitude and what his challenges have been, he's open to natural things that can help him live longer, live healthier. And he's constantly fighting for a quality of life. And as a mentor, as an example for all those who have, many health conditions. So do you mind sharing with us a little bit about what's going to take place next week?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to be heading out to Atlanta, Georgia, to have some tests ran on me. Basically, it's going to be, if I can explain it in generic terms, I'll be hooked up to a machine. It'll be transferring my blood through this machine and bringing it back in, and it'll be checking basically my plasma in my blood and stuff like that, purifying it, and also making sure I have the right amount. Just yesterday, for a marker, I had to go in and get a blood drawn that's been sent over to them. So it's some really cutting edge stuff that they are going to be doing. I'm really happy to be a part of it. The name of the company is called Fit9 Wellness, and they're involved in that. And also, I'll be having some other blood work done that's really cutting edge. That's going to be checking to see what type of toxins I have in my blood. As they explained to me, a lot of people have a certain type of mold that they have in their blood that causes a number of different things, from stomach problems, digestive issues, and stuff like that, high blood pressure. So, yeah, I've been fortunate, probably because of publicly, I've had so many different health problems that a lot of companies will reach out to me and offer these different things. I remember, I forgot where I was, and another part of the world, and they knew about my kidney disease, focal glomerulosclerosis, and they just called me while I was in this country. I think it was Bulgaria, and they said, "Hey, we'd like you to come down, and we just want to run some tests on you." And they did an ultrasound on my back where your kidneys normally are, and what they discovered is it's like, it's really interesting. There's absolutely no sign that you've ever had kidneys there in the normal two places in your back, because all of the blood vessels and everything had completely disappeared. So yeah, I'm proud of this. It helps me because, yeah, there's so many incredibly underlying problems that I'm going through that just doesn't make sense. 99.9% of the things I'm going through, it's no one in my family tree has ever developed, and we're trying to figure those things out. Like I said, one of the doctors' hypothesis was, because of me having so many different blood transfusions back in the early 90s, and they just didn't have a purification system like they did now, that can be a cause of it. But we still don't know that. So, we will be documenting everything that goes on at Fit9. We will be releasing those videos of me actually getting that work done. And later on, we're going to have one of those doctors come on Flex for Life and kind of discuss what they do, what my process was, and the results that they came up with.
So, Dr. Hardy, how much of from your experience, how much of high blood pressure is genetic versus result of lifestyle?
You know, again, as I will go back to that kind of epigenetic comment I made earlier, that the genetics, our genes are our hardwiring, but you're not always a slave to your genes. And so there are some of the lifestyle and environmental components that will take whatever you're predisposed to and unmask it and make it manifest, and sometimes make it most of the time make it worse. So again, a lot of African Americans are salt sensitive. That's been proven. But if you are mindful of not adding, keeping your sodium intake low, you can sort of manage, and you exercise or walk and do certain things. So there's a predisposition that your genes carry, but again, you're not a slave to your genes. Medications can also help where your genes have failed you. So those African Americans, other people who are suspect of the system, they don't want to take medicines for whatever historical reasons, which are justified, you're still not getting the benefit of what modern science, what Flex is going through now. Someone is going to benefit later down the line from the knowledge and information that he is allowing himself to go through, so that someone can benefit later. So these things, when you're not participating, or you're not, it's like I've heard of saying once that, not getting involved or hating someone is like drinking poison, expecting them to get sick. If you're not doing the things that you can do from a lifestyle modification and environmental standpoint, things that are within your control, and if you're not willing to do what some of the things that modern science, has available for you and me, then we can expect the consequences that our predisposition and our genetic hardwiring has for us. And so that's what I'd say to that. But again, there are some people you need to try to know your family history if you can. You'll know who's had blood pressure issues or diabetes or cancers or things like that. Those are very important. Like I said, my whole journey started from me not being able to meet my grandfather, who died when my father was 13 from a massive heart attack at age 55. My 55th birthday was a milestone for me. I made it. I've been told my whole life I look exactly like him, and I'm thinking, wow, our genes got to be really close. I look exactly like him. He had boys. He had 8 boys and 4 girls. I had 2 boys. All of his boys were taller and bigger than him, and both of mine are the same. So, 55 may be it for me, but I've got something to say about that. I take my medications. I try to eat, that multicolored meal. Most times I try to walk and do certain things that are within my control. And so I don't say let your genes be your, only destiny. You have certain things that you can try to do to improve your life. And I think we just should do it.
Guys, I have a question going back towards the cultural side of things and barriers that healthcare, masculinity are shifting social ideology of masculinity or have changed things. I know you said that can create its own barriers, but something that kind of piqued my interest earlier that I looked this up when he said Flex's hypertensive issues being kind of a surprise. I found a study from Caselli was actually published by the NLM. He looked at 2,000 competitive elite athletes and found that 3% of them were hypertensive, with 64% of those people being men. And that's 60 people out of 2,000. That's actually a lot considering these are elite level athletes. So those are probably, I'm sure they didn't even think that was an issue before this whole study. How do you think that's going to factor into? I mean, you go into athletics in high school and college, and you're supposed to get physicals done. They do very basic ones, but how is this going to influence the community within the what people consider athletic individuals?
So, your vital signs, like you mentioned earlier, getting your biomarkers, knowing your history, believe your eyes when they're showing you that the blood pressure is elevated. One isolated measurement, okay, but that's why you have to continue to repeat. Just because someone is fit and they're active, then they still have that underlying genetic predisposition. And there are other causes other than just the kind of run-of-the-mill, what we call essential hypertension, which is primary hypertension. There are also secondary causes. I think I've heard Flex allude to having FSGN,
FSGS, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, FSGS. So that was probably what was underlying his blood pressure issues. A lot of your blood pressure is regulated at the level of the kidneys because of the hormones that the kidneys produce to keep the blood pressures and vasculature constricted. If they did ultrasound and showed that he didn't even have some of the vasculature because it had already sclerosed. You need to be looking at those 60 athletes who do everything right from the environmental side in terms of things. They're probably eating right. They're probably exercising. They're probably getting the proper rest, and they're still hypertensive. You need to be looking at other areas. Do they have thyroid issues? Do they have adrenal issues? Do they have other issues that are causing secondary causes of hypertension? Those vital signs will start leading you to the right direction, but you got to pay attention to it. And you got to make sure people understand how serious it is, that despite that particular population, despite all the training, all the things they're doing, they're still having high blood pressure. You need to go beyond maybe your primary care, go to a hypertension specialist, a renal doctor, or a cardiologist, an endocrinologist. There's something that we're not able to do and see right up front that needs to be looked at to figure out what's going on with that person.
Yeah, and it's just where we are with time. Like you mentioned, I could have had the kidney disease, focal glomerulosclerosis, early on in life. I will say this: back in the 1980s, there was a doctor who came to my gym all the time, who was a big fan, and he just said, "Hey, Flex, let me do some blood work on you, just for." And what he discovered is, even at that age, I was already leaking protein into my urine, which back then they didn't know of focal glomerulosclerosis. It wasn't that popular. I don't even know if it was even known back then. But I asked him, so what do I do? And he goes, well, if you're a drinker, I would tell you, slow down in your drinking. But so I always remember that. And then later on, when I was categorized as sudden death, and they explained to me what that meant, and I was shaken to my core. At that time, I was leaking over 16 grams of protein in my urine. So, it's interesting because, like what you're saying, know your family tree and everything. A lot of times, like our parents or grandparents died what they would call natural causes, not knowing that it was from something else. So it's hard to kind of get that information, because I know my grandmother died and it was supposedly at natural causes. I don't remember my grandfather because he died so much earlier than me. But that's really interesting. It's also just based on time, how much information is known back then. Even when they ran tests on me and it took them a year to admit that I had focal glomerulosclerosis, is because like we just needed to make sure, because there was only a few other people that they know globally that only had that. So, but Dr. Hardy, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on my podcast. Your information is wealth. Like they say, health is wealth. And you said a key thing that I truly believe: we invest in everything else more so than we do ourselves, and we are the person that make all those other things happen, take care of our families, pay our bills, have our jobs, our 401k, our hair, all that stuff. So we need to put ourselves first. But I can't thank you enough for taking the time out and coming and being a part of the show. And as I said before the show, your credentials is just like absolutely mind-boggling. That your achievements and everything, and it's an honor to have talked to you, and I hope that a lot of people will learn from this conversation.
And Flex, before we go, can I just share a real quick story about Dr. Hardy? Won't take no more than a minute. I'm gonna put him up on the screen so you can see what a doctor that really cares look like. We know most all doctors really care greatly about their patients. So Dr. Hardy and a few of the doctors of mine that I get calls from families or whatever, I reach out to them. So when I was visiting you last, when we were at the mental health summit in Las Vegas, I got a call from a young lady that was frantic because her mother apparently had lost her left hand had gone numb 3 times. She fell and hit herself. She went to the doctor in the community, and they sent her back home. So you had a stroke. They sent her back home, and then they scheduled tests. The test was several days out, some of them even more than a week out. And I was just amazed. You see, I knew this guy when he was 18 years old. We pledged a fraternity together. So my memory is a little different. But I sent him a long message out there just reminding him and thanking him for all the great things that he does. Long story short, I was just amazed listening to him explain to the young lady what was going on in her mother's body. Okay. And his final statement to her, he said, he was always very respectful to the other doctor. Right. He said, if it was my mother, I would take her to the emergency room. Long story short, the young lady, they take their mother to the emergency room in Houston, Texas. And he's a physician in Georgia, impacting lives all over the world. They took her to the doctor. They said, "Oh my God," at the hospital. They immediately admitted her. She ended up having surgery. She had 2 major large blockages in her body. So what would have happened to that young 82-year-old if the daughter hadn't contacted me? I contacted Dr. Hardy, and Dr. Hardy took time out on a Saturday morning after working. He worked very long hours, drives quite a bit, and shared with this young lady, basically, I don't know if it's a stretch to say saved her life, but 2 major arteries, and she'd already had a stroke beforehand. Now that's pretty amazing, and that's the quality of the physician that he is, and that's really why we're trying to amplify health and well-being in our community. Because, like you said, the doctor who sent her home did not look like her. The doctor that looked like her sent her to the emergency room. She was admitted immediately and had surgery on 2 major blockages in the body. So on behalf of the family, I want to just say thank you to him, and thank you to all the great physicians out there that are doing everything they can to help support us as we eat poorly. God bless you, brother.
Thank you. You gentlemen are too kind. Flex, the legend, Mr. Greg, LaQuentin, thank you all so much for, inviting me to this wonderful podcast. I'm sure you've helped a lot of people, and I'm just glad to be a small part. And again, just thank you so much for allowing me to participate with you today.
Thank you.
Truly an honor. Thank you. There you go. Another segment of Flex for Life. Thank you guys for listening. You can find and follow everything on Flex TV or my Instagram, official Flex Wheeler. We'll see you next Wednesday.